webinar is entitled Men in Leadership, and it came about really because Novia One had a whole series of women in leadership webinars and programs, and there were voices saying, well, what about the men? So Verity and Claudine and their teams put this event on for us. And although it's called Men in Leadership, I think it's the emphasis on leadership, and it's obviously the webinar is for everyone. And we have four very good guest speakers who I shall introduce shortly. I wanted to just, before I do the introduction, I just wanted to get one thing out of the way. It came up in conversation and I read about it in the papers over the weekend, and it's gender-based violence. And I just want to just mention it briefly because it is a topic that is floating around and sort of touches upon men and maybe leadership. And our view for this webinar is that we acknowledge it's a massively important topic. It is deemed by some as a national emergency or crisis, and a male-dominant societal structure is a necessary condition for gender-based violence, but on its own it's not sufficient condition for gender-based violence. There are other multifactorial dimensions that play into it, such as poverty, social economic stress, disempowerment, men, and local political and crime-related factors. They all play a role. It's a very important topic, but we would just like to make a distinction between that and the title of this webinar. And so my request is that we acknowledge it, but we don't go down that path unless people feel really strongly about it. And obviously the other topic we don't want to talk about is the rugby results, out of courtesy to some of our speakers and guests. There was a sort of overwhelming outcome, but not without its contentious decisions. So, which is in itself quite interesting when it comes to leadership discussion. But let's park that for a moment. Okay, so let me introduce. Well, there's another sort of preface I would like to make around leadership. So I'm a surgeon. My role with Novia One is that I'm the chief financial officer. But my provenance, my first career was in surgery. So I'm a surgeon by training, and I worked in surgery. And I did a hospital management course many years ago. And my trainer said, oh my God, there are about 10 or 15,000 books published every year on leadership. So I thought, okay, in preparation for this webinar, let me have a look. So Amazon offered 57,136 books with the word leadership in the title in 2015. Okay, and I asked, well, how many books more recently? They couldn't give a proper estimate other than to say about 60,000 books are available on Amazon with the title Leadership. Okay, and then in preparation for this very specific title, I said, well, how many speak about men in leadership and how many about women in leadership? Well, there are about 10 to 50,000 books mentioning women in leadership and only 1,000 books mentioning men in leadership, which I think is a very interesting departing point. And so I think we have something to discuss here. Okay, so let me introduce the speakers. We have JP van Sittard. Is everything all right? I'm having other voices in the line here. So we have JP, who works for Makuru. He's Group Head of People Effectiveness and Total Rewards. He's a registered industrial psychologist and a registered rewards specialist, and is recently named as one of the top 5 most talented professionals under 40 in financial services. He's a member of Mensa and the Golden Key Society, and his passion is around mental health, succession management, employee wellness, and work from home practices. Then we have Mpho Msimanga. He's with Liberty and is a divisional executive for services and channel management. He's a graduate in business management. He's a graduate in business management from Henley Business School, and has experience in short-term insurance and retail, and more recently now long-term insurance. He pioneered dynamic capacity modeling, implementing new aspiring leadership programs, and he's passionate about dynamic leadership, inspirational and authentic leadership. Then we have Neelan Porthan, who's divisional executive for Liberty Advisory Partners sales channel, transforming sales operations and digital transformation in the insurance industry. He has a Master's of Business Administration and is working on a PhD. Neelan, you didn't mention that in our discussion. That sounds it sounds like a lot of hard work and exciting. He's passionate about leadership development, coaching, transforming teams from silo to collaborative networks. Yes, we need that as well in our business. 25 years of experience in transforming businesses, people, and processes. He's known as Mr. Fix-It. He transforms non-functioning teams into high-performance teams, and he has numerous sales accolades. His motto is, "We all win when we all win." And then we have Nicky Sheridan from Ireland. He's a chartered accountant with a 30-year career spanning Europe, America, Middle East, and Africa. 23 years of this was at Oracle. He was the CEO of Oracle in Ireland, and then the CEO of Oracle in South Africa. So he has very deep and many years of experience in global business transformation, organizational turnarounds, large-scale digital transformations, and high-growth strategies. So we have, as you can see, we have collectively great speakers who will have a lot of depth and range of experience and knowledge of leadership. So I mentioned the leadership publications, and we could even go a little bit further and say, leadership is a bit of yin and yang. There's a spectrum. And if we want to make it gender specific, we can say, well, there's the female end of the spectrum, which is human and empathetic, collaborative and inclusive, vulnerable and humble. And then there's the male end of the spectrum, which is transactional and directive, rational and task-driven, dominant and controlling, if not even autocratic at times. Now, these are obviously just words. They could be construed as stereotypes, and really I think what we're now going to do is we're going to open the floor and discuss, well, what is leadership? What are the good sides, the not so good sides? How is it changing? And what do we all do in the room in terms of thinking about leadership tomorrow? How do we raise our children, our sons, and how do we hire into our businesses? What do we do tomorrow morning? So I'll hand over the microphone to anyone who raises their hands of the speakers who would like to go first. Nikki, I think you should go first, since you have got the widest in terms of different geographies and jurisdictions and different cultures. You've experienced and done leadership across so many countries. Please give us your view on leadership.
Well, first of all, I'd like to empathize with my colleague Neelan, and empathize with all the South Africans on the call this morning. Neelan was quoted as saying, "We all win when we all win." So I think as a result, Saturday, unfortunately, none of us won because the poor little Irish guys lost. Anyway, to more serious matters. The definition of leadership, which works best for me, is the conductor of an orchestra. It is the management of positive energy, and those focus predominantly on people, organizations, and I think maybe one other thing that is, I hope, apparent to the listeners this morning, is that I'm a little bit older as well. So yes, I'm international. I've worked in a number of different countries and a number of different cultures. I'm also a little bit older. So one of the things that we might like to bear in mind is how how much change has affected both men in leadership and indeed women in leadership over the course of the last 3 or 4 decades. It's been a huge change, and one which I think everybody on this call could agree that it's been a change for the better. When I first started working, that there was no female toilet, for example, on the executive floor. That's where I come from, and now we've progressed so well that we're not quite at 50-50s in most countries and most industries. We've still got a lot to learn. And I don't think we can take our eye off in this country, the gender-based violence that we still endure. Excellent article in today's Business Day. I may add, and startling statistics of one third of females reporting physical violence, 1/10 sexual violence. That is a backdrop. I know it's not the main focus for today, but I'd like to, start off by saying that I think men have learned an awful lot over the course of the last few decades. We've become much more empathetic, and all those other words you articulated so nicely, which capture the main drive of female leadership, which we've learned a huge amount from, and we're much better leaders as a result of all that. And the last thing I'd say, really, in terms of introduction, and it's a comment that we had mentioned previously, talking about situational circumstances and different leadership styles in different circumstances. And one of the things that I have spent most of my time doing over the last couple of decades is around sales leadership and driving results. And in this particular instance, the sort of classical male leadership of being very direct and very assertive and very maybe controlling as well, are leadership styles which can be quite effective, if I may say so, in driving sales teams to produce results. So that's the kind of opening remarks that I would say, Chair, before I could speak for the whole hour and a half, but you wouldn't want me to do that. Let me leave it like that for the starters.
Wonderful, wonderful. Neelan, this segues into your to you really, because you've done quite a bit of research around the different situations that require leadership, and maybe you want to give your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Okay. So I think one of the biggest and most important points talking about situational leadership is this whole concept about versatility. So as a leader, one of the most critical things you need to be able to do is be versatile in order to adapt to the situation you find yourself in. As Nikki pointed out, maybe a more direct kind of leadership style is involved or required from a sales perspective. And you may have a little bit more flexibility depending on the situation and the team that you lead. But the idea and the concept that we want to just plant in the minds of our colleagues that have joined us and the ones that will listen to the recording is this concept of managing a situation requires a certain kind of leadership. And actually what you need to do is be versatile enough to understand when it requires you to maybe change up something that may not have been working. So really, I mean, that is the concept I wanted to land, kind of building on Nikki's point and saying that there's a great opportunity for us to actually work on that versatility, because you may have a natural style, which is something that you kind of feel really strongly and have seen the results in, depending on what the challenge or opportunity was. But there certainly is room for you to consider the concept of versatility when it comes to leadership. And I mean, Kai, that's really one of the important points I wanted to make sure the team understood.
Great, and we're going to unpack that in a moment. JP and Paul, would you like to add to this, or add your own angle? Yeah,
sure. I think from our side, the key focus for us, and it kind of reflects the more general trend about leadership, is really the shift into a space where leaders are expected to hold space for their people, be able to deliver results, but also grow their people. and facilitate an environment where they feel safe. And I think that's a massive shift from where we were in the past, where it was more a command and control environment, to a place where now my role as a leader is not around command and control anymore, but how do I create an environment for you to deliver your best? And I think fundamentally that's also a massive shift into the assumption of the employee in the workplace, irrespective of gender, where in the past it used to be I have to manage you to get the best out of you, where now it's I just need to create the right environment and you will deliver against that, and you will deliver your best. And I think it almost creates this challenge of yes, you can be straightforward and direct in certain circumstances, but actually to be a good leader is to not be as hands-on, and to not be as controlling as we were in the past, but more around allowing people to act in the best interest of the company, give their best efforts, contribute to the team, and being comfortable enough as a leader that you can create that space and not be as hands-on. And I think that's a massive shift from a leadership perspective. In the 90s and 2000s, it was servant leadership. That was kind of big all over the place, and I think that just speaks to the intent around leadership is one where I'm creating an environment for you to flourish versus I control the environment and I control you.
Okay. Yeah, maybe if I can just add on to that as well. I think there's been quite a talk around environments, and I think for me, what typically highlights leadership, whether good or bad, is the different perspectives, the environments, and trying as much as you possibly can to address the misunderstandings. Because I think in all spectrums, there's bound to be misunderstandings, and I think for me, what sums up this process that we've just been speaking about is I mean, there's a story about a monkey that used to live in a forest tree. So one day the monkey saw a fish swimming in the river, and the monkey thought that the fish was struggling, right? So, I mean, the monkey then felt a bit compassionate and resolved to save the fish. So it just swiftly climbed down from the tree, and it reached out and grabbed the fish, and it just put it on a leaf, and just the fish just flapped, and then eventually the fish died, right? But the monkey was a bit puzzled because it only wanted to help, right? So then what you realize is that this story sort of like highlights fundamental ideas around different perspectives around environments and around misunderstandings, because the monkey, being a land-dwelling creature, interpreted the fish swimming as struggling or suffering because it judged a particular situation based on his own environment and his own experience. So, I mean, if the fish is underwater, not breathing air as it does, and the assumption is that the fish was in peril or was in pain. So, I mean, all the well-intentioned efforts of the monkey just sort of like fell flat because it just led to the fish's demise. So I think we need to sort of like have a bit of a cautious approach in terms of our assumptions as leaders, and it's necessary for us to apply different perspectives into different environments. And so I think we need to encourage each other from a development perspective as well, to have a deeper sense of understanding. Yes, we might apply a bit of empathy in it, but diversity as a perspective is also quite an important issue for us to bring onto the table. So I think the overarching element here is the different perspectives and environments of what a leader should be.
Wonderful. So we have these different dimensions, haven't we? Situational. You spoke about the different perspectives and maybe sort of the different audience of the different people who are being led and who lead. And then the overall holding space and the sort of general change in the style of leadership or the intention of leadership, and one of versatility. Before we progress, or before we carry on unpacking these, I just want to say that this is an interactive session. The invitation's gone out on the chat for you to write your questions or comments, but I see there's only AI assistants who've answered so far. But please feel free to either raise your hand or write a question for the speakers in the chat, and Verity will pick it up, or I will try and pick it up and make sure that gets answered. Okay, so we have, coming back to the conversation, we have the overarching intent, but there's a lot around, they're different situations, different horses for courses. There's not one size fits all, really. And South Africa, particularly today, we have, we are really diverse in terms of generations, ages, functions, demographic backgrounds, education, and so on and so forth. It never ends. And everything you said, Mpo, I feel plays out every day. Miscommunication, misunderstanding, and also then if you have if you have a business that's international, different geographies and different cultures. So what do we make of that? How do we make it versatile? How do we ensure that we're sufficiently responsive in this in a situation with multiple parts, moving parts? How do we make sure we're versatile?
So I'm going to chip in. I wonder if I'm properly answering your question, but at least giving some food for thought. From a South African perspective, I've been blessed to live in our beautiful country for the last 20 years. I love South Africa, want for the best for South Africa. I think if we look at women in leadership, we have still some ways to go. We have in the European Union, for example, 27 countries, 8 of which has a female head of state. So that's what, around 30%. And in Africa, we have 4 leaders out of the 54 countries. So 30%, 8%. I think we have a long way to go. So I think we've all got a lot to learn in this continent, because I think that it's indicative of how not only we aspire to leadership and how much we respect leadership, but then again, it's got its reciprocity in how countries, etc., are run. And I think we could agree that Africa has been quite, run predominantly by males over to today, and that's an opportunity for us to grow, if you like. So I see some great potential in Africa having more female leaders in future. And I think it's helpful for us to think, what do we need to do in our day-to-day lives to make that a reality? It's not just about a vote on voting day. It's how we go about our everyday business, whether we're leading or whether we are following, that there's a greater amount of respect should be given to the abilities of women to lead effectively.
On Nikki's point, I think what you see is the remnants of it coming through in second and third line leadership from a political perspective. What we've also got to be very aware of is both your geopolitical environment as well as your generational component. I saw a question very briefly. Sorry, I'm distracted by the questions, but let me quickly go into it, because I think it kind of leads to it. It talks about, and it's Tirushan, a familiar name. What behaviors or habits do you believe will define South Africa's next generation of transformative leaders? And I thought it would be a great opportunity for us to talk about the fact that there are generational nuances that you need to consider in terms of leadership moving forward. So what would have been perfectly normal and acceptable for maybe an older individual, irrespective of gender, may not necessarily be applicable moving forward. The kind of engagement that we require from the different generational individuals coming through our ranks may be different. But I think the essence of what we're trying to understand is if you really are an exceptional leader, there's such a great opportunity for you to create more leaders within the different generations, within the different constructs and cultures, because the concept of each one teach one really resonates with us, saying, how do we build each other? Because there may be things that I learned from JP that I would have never learned from anyone else if I'm open to learning. And the concept there is really about how do we drive this, and to talk about Tirushan's point, it really is the discipline and the ability to be able to navigate through the different opportunities that you find yourself in. I don't know if that makes sense, or I'm hoping that makes sense. And Mpo and JP, please add what you believe may work.
I think from my side, apart from the kind of leadership challenge that we have in businesses, and as much as that has changed, I think the societal stereotypes of men are still there. that hinders men from being the best leaders that they can be. We still talk about men being the strong ones. You have to be stoic. There's a lot of content out there on men being stoic in leadership roles and not showing emotions and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, we're asking them to be empathetic and caring and provide an emotionally stable and psychologically safe environment for their team. And so that you almost get this emotional dissonance that happens with male leaders, where you have to be this caring and kind of thoughtful leader, but the kind of social norm and the conversation is that you can't, as a leader, you need to be strong and supportive. And I think a big challenge for us here is we can see it in the stats. Like we can see that men are more likely than women to commit suicide. Men struggle immensely with mental health. Men struggle immensely with kind of talking about their emotions, seeking help, seeking therapy. And I think that's a massive leadership challenge for us, is around how do we as leaders step in as men to help other men to get the permission and the mandate. And it's not that they're not, from a personality perspective, as industrial psychologists, they still have the same capabilities of being empathetic, the same capabilities in terms of being conscientious and caring. Like there's no differences necessarily at a meta level there. It's just around that mandate and permission to be able to be like that in society. And the quicker we can solve the societal conversation, the easier it is to transfer that into the workplace, because I need to take that from outside into inside. And your team or workplace is a mini society, if I can put it that way. It's you have all the dynamics you would have in society in that small team. And so I think as if we take it from like what a good leader is to kind of where men is now, yes, organizations have made massive progress in terms of shifting what good leaders look like. And I think both men and women have made massive strides in terms of stepping into that role of being a good leader. As much as there are challenges on the women's side, I think there's also challenges on the men in terms of those new requirements and how do we help them to kind of close that gap of what a new kind of in the modern era looks like in terms of a leader.
And I think JP, just stepping in terms of your societal discussions that need to be had. I mean, those are also quite emotional. Discussions that need to be had, specifically when it relates to men. Because I mean, look, if you look around, if you've noticed, there's sort of like a strange shift happening within men. It's not loud enough for us to be alarmed, but it's clear enough that we can sense that there's a shift, right? Because what you see is that more and more men are becoming more emotionally muted, because historically we never were emotional beings, and then trying to step into a workplace where there's so much nuances around how you should be leading vis-a-vis where we headed into the future and historically where we come from, it becomes a bit of a teething issue for us to be able to navigate around. And it's not because men don't necessarily want to feel, it's because there's a concept around men themselves where they think that if they feel too much, and that happens without a moment of rest, and then so like triggers issues where there could be failure as a result of that. And we know inherently men don't want to sustainably find themselves in that kind of environment. So I think for me, it's more of a conversational discussion that needs to be had around emotional perspectives where men are concerned. I mean, we would try and navigate around mental wellness for men, and then say to men, come, let's get into a forum and have open discussions around mental wellness. And the participation rate would be very low, because again, the issue is systemic around the fact that culturally, men are not supposed to be seen as emotional beings. And that will then obviously roll over into your leadership style, because how do you find yourself and how do you navigate that entire process around your mental wellness first? And then secondly, emotionally, are you in tune to understand that in the next future leader requires you to be in check with all of those particular aspects of life?
Yeah, one thing I want to add there is kind of just to sum up what I was talking about. So men who are, generally statistically less likely to seek help, express vulnerability, talk about their mental health, are at the same time expected to create psychologically safe environments where others can do so. And I feel like that's where the paradox comes in and the challenge comes in.
Okay, so two questions here. Is the conflict or the dissonance that you've just described between what is required generally, but what can be delivered for whatever historical, cultural, even biological reasons, That gap, is that different in different countries?
So,
sorry, go, Nikki.
sorry, JP. It's first of all, JP. It's a super point you bring up. It's so fundamental. It's so critical. I'm just going to make two comments on it. First, to answer your question, Ty, I don't think so. There are as many Irish men, European men, American men that I'm very familiar with in friends and family and colleagues that have the same amount of insecurity that Mpo and JP are referring to. So that is may I say, a global phenomenon, a global problem, and it underseats everything here. So I think it's critically important. I'm going to make one more comment, which is, well, it's my personal experience. It was some advice which was given to me 25 years ago, and it just stayed with me for the last 25, and I'm sure that the rest of the time. And this, let's call him a coach. There was a senior team and a junior team in Oracle that I was working with, and the coach asked the same question in two different ways. First of all, to the senior team, and then to the junior team who were reporting into the senior team. He asked us, and I was guilty of being in the former team. He said, "What is it that you think the people reporting into you want from you?" And the second question he asked the people reporting is, "What is it that you want from these guys? Who are your bosses?" And we came up with, pardon my language, all this BS. Oh, they need our technical expertise, our strategic thought processes, our amazing communication, charisma, blah, blah, blah. And the people who were, of course, knew the answers, because it was them, they said very simply, we want them to be open with us. We want them to be honest with us. We want them to give us a safe place. We know how to do our jobs, or 90% of our jobs. We do want some coaching and some mentoring, but above all, we want to be given a safe place as humans to go out and do our work. And that's just stayed with me for my entire life, because that, I think, helps a little way, JP, to suggest that if we brought that to the workplace, men in leadership every day, we would at least understand that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that ratio for good reason. And if we can if we can have empathy to check in with the people who we lead, then the world will be a better place and men will be better leaders.
Yeah, I think 100% agree. And I think where we see male leaders spilling this into what society would call toxic leadership is where they don't necessarily have the skills, the understanding, the access to understand their own emotions, to actually respond appropriately into an environment where there are multidimensional emotional situations that they need to navigate. And I think the more we speak about men, and I think was listed in a comment there as well, Zuko, around the more we encourage leaders to be vulnerable, to talk about their stuff, to create a safe environment, the more it gives permission for men to also do it. And I think as men in leadership, we have a very critical role to get other men to talk about their emotions and their vulnerability, because men are more likely to listen to men. You go for golf, you go for a bike ride, or whatever that looks like. And the more we have the right conversations to enable other men to feel those ways, the better it is in the workplace, I think.
I mean, I think also if for me, what's striking now is that we live in an age of constant input, where it's just notification after notification, it's crisis upon crisis, it's tragedies and it's opinions, and it's demand. So every hour, basically, there's a new urgency that arrives at your doorstep. And I think from a leader's perspective, despite the strength that we think we need to exhibit or show, I don't think there was a process that was designed for this level of intensity without allowing yourself the time to pause. So I think it's a bit of a difficult one, because then the emotions pile up faster than we can understand them, and specifically as men in this instance. So what tends to happen is that then we sort of like shut down a bit quietly, and we become invisible, and almost it becomes an automatic instinct. It's not a choice; it's a survival instinct. And I think for me, the new survival mode is staying functional while the inner world sort of like goes dim within you, and so it doesn't give you the leverage to really shine and be the person that you need to be, because you're always staying functional because of the society that you're finding yourself involved in.
Look, I think JP and Mpo, those are such incredible points. The only thing I would like to add on it is creating a kind of psychological safety net also requires support from the individuals higher than you. So there may be an executive sponsor or requirement ahead of you that drives this cultural nuance, because all of the stuff we're talking about actually links back to culture. If you think about it, right? It talks about what culture are you trying to create in the business, as a leader, as an individual, as a human being, as a mentor. And a lot of the times it will actually require us to manage upwards. And I think some of us struggle very hard to do that. I think we're very adept at managing down, because you manage your staff, you manage your people, you manage the people you interact with. But sometimes it requires a bit of tenacity, a bit of bravery to manage up, because sometimes the toxic component of the culture actually resides at levels higher than you. And it is a dangerous one, because it requires you to challenge paradigms. And sometimes when you challenge paradigms, you are seen as a disruptive leader, but you challenge the paradigms in order to create the safety for the individuals that you have such a great intent for. But I mean, the point around not being vulnerable, not being able to express emotions, and even being referred to as an emotional leader, I think is a compliment, because how can you not work with people and not be emotional? So look, I mean, I think this is really an incredible component, and I think you guys have really touched on something good here. I see there's quite a number of questions on. I don't know if we want to climb into some of them. So please guide us there, Ty.
Chair, may I just respond a little bit to Neelan's point there, because I think he brings up a fascinating issue. We talked previously about diversity and how we manage people who are at different age groups, for example, right? It takes a different sort of leadership style to manage Gen Z generation as opposed to managing other people. But I think the other important facet here is when we talk about leadership, as Neelan alludes to, he's talking about, the leaders and they manage the people who work for that person. It's also very important to realize and accept that the managing upward that Neelan mentions is critically important. Who do we accept, tolerate, vote for as leaders? Because when I talked previously about the fewer percentage leaders in Africa versus in the European Union, for example, we're also assuming, in my opinion, that these countries are ready to accept female leaders at the same time. And I think this point about, but bringing it all together, JP's point about being the insecurities that men have, society, from a societal perspective, also plays into who is it okay to vote for, to elect as a leader, to have, because we as a society, men and women, need to get as comfortable, not only with women in leadership, but also with that new style males. And I'd like to think us four are party to. Having listened to your comments, I think we are, but that needs to be broadened. And that is really, really important, that we take those insecurities and we allow us to be able to exhibit them and to be okay with them, and therefore to accept them into others, and to accept leaders and men in leadership who exhibit those sorts of personality traits.
Coming back to Paul's point, we live in a world that is really highly pressurized. Things economically in every industry, things are becoming more volatile. And there are organizations and probably even audiences from these organizations who are going through, very personal experiences of downsizing or right sizing or basically having to fight for their jobs. So we have that, and obviously, if they're publicly listed companies, or even if they're not, you have to create shareholder value. You have these pressures on the one hand, and historically, the sort of stereotypical male directive transactional style, has accounted for much of the economy and the businesses as we know them. And now we are advocating, no, we need to be open and vulnerable and in tune and have that safe space. I mean, how do we think through this? How do we make this happen? And also, we've got to manage upwards to the person who's going to determine our bonus and our career and our promotion. And we've got to deliver results. Now, that's all a very tall order. I mean, what are your thoughts about how can you make this happen? New leadership style in a new era where business is becoming a lot tougher for many people, and politics for that as well. Hey, in particular, coming back to Nikki's point of national political leadership. I mean, we're going through hugely volatile times. How do we think through this?
I think from my side, and I'm going to talk about our organization, one of the things we drive we are fintech, so we have very aggressive targets, we have very aggressive ambitions, strategy, outcomes we want to achieve. We have shareholders we need to report to, and I think the key focus for us from a leadership perspective is not the what you do. Yes, the what is your day job. You achieve your results. You drive high standards. It's how you do it. It's how do you show up as a leader, treating the people in your team as human beings, giving generously of your time, building relationships. But at the same time, when you keep people accountable, you treat them as a human being, not as a resource. And I think where we lose touch of treating people like human beings is where we start seeing them as a means to an end. I want to achieve this result, so you are the way I achieve that, and so I'm going to put pressure on you and drive you to achieve this result. And that's where you get stuff where, we over leverage people and we under leverage processes, and people get burnt out, and I start getting put under pressure because we're not making the target, so I'm going to drive you harder to get to the target, and I start losing the humanity in the conversation because I'm now under pressure. Where our biggest focus in our organization is the team member is not the means to the end. The end is actually the team member. The work we do is the means, and that allows us to grow the person, enable the person, and by enabling and growing them, they deliver better results, they deliver faster results without us having to necessarily only drive results. And so when you sit down with a person to have a conversation about results, it's not about the results. Yes, we will achieve those, but it's how can I as a leader help you to reach those results? How do I step in and provide the resources, the skills, and the guidance that you need, even of my own time, to help you reach that result? Because for us as a business, it's not about leaders just delegating, go away, do your work. If you have a question, ask me, come back. It's we expect our leaders to invest time with their teams, unconditional time. How are you doing? Where are you going? How can I support you? And really be in the trenches, if I can put it that way, with their team. And I think that's how we try to balance shareholder results or value with the human side of it, is that the humans are not a means to an end. They are the end.
Good, very good. Yeah. Neelan, I'm dying to ask you this question around. I want to come back to your versatility concept. How does that fit in with what JP just said?
I really love that culture that JP and the team are creating in that fintech environment, because it can be really tough and demanding, especially when the pressure's on to deliver projects. I think we all aspire to get there, especially in the organizations that we lead. And look, I mean, leadership in social circumstances versus work environments are exactly the same. And why I think this versatility quotient or component is so important. There's a question in the chat, and it says, how is it? Or sorry, I'm paraphrasing now. How can I support gender equity or gender, driving gender equality if I'm potentially threatened myself? Meaning, my job may be on the line if I groom this magnificent human being who could be better than me. And my answer and my response, and it talks about this versatility, is, when you look back and you see the performance of the team and they acknowledge themselves and say, we did it, you have achieved superior leadership performance, because it is the acknowledgement, and it's a kind of culmination of what JP is talking about, as well as the guidance and support from you. In fact, we should aspire to have all of the people that we are privileged enough to work with do much better than us. And it's, from a psychological perspective, it's scary, because what this means is I am potentially working myself out of a job. I am no longer required.
Mm.
And my challenge to all of you is, so what about if you look at your trajectory of your life and your performance? Every single time you've done better and you groomed and supported better people, you have been better and you have moved and you have taken a different view. I think where it becomes really tricky in the corporate space is, if you look at the corporate hierarchy, it's so difficult to predict where your next move is. And I'm asking, is it not an opportunity for us to actually challenge those traditional vibes that says, I have to move in that direction, this way. Why can't I move this way? So I broaden my spectrum. I challenge my opportunity. It requires so many people to think differently. But I will say this quite honestly, and demonstrate it in terms of the historical performance of the teams. The more you empower your leaders and actually give up your roles, the better opportunities are opened up for you as a leader, because it is something that very few are able to do with conviction, because you are so scared. I'm sorry to be so bold, but yeah, that's my view, Ty.
No, that's very good. That's very good. Getting rid of the fear that someone might eclipse you, and yet we're all working our way. Ultimately, we're all going to be redundant. Nikki, please.
Well, I think this is spot on, because you remember JP brought in this insecurity previously. And then Neelan is explaining to the person who posed the question that good leaders will never, be worried about how well they grow, how well they recruit somebody, or how well they develop somebody to become better than they. I understand it's practically, and let's have a very honest conversation. But good leaders don't do this. Good leaders recruit people who are better than they develop people to be better than them, and everything else. So it comes back to, men in leadership have got to rid themselves, and I know the question is easier than the answers, of this insecurity complex, right? This deep insecurity that we talk about, whether it be suicidal or depression or all sorts of other societal issues we talked about. And then here it leads into leadership and good leadership. And this insecurity just doesn't show up. And if you're going to show up like that, you will not be a good leader. We've got to do everything we can for the people who we manage and who we lead. It's absolutely critical.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. JP, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really working in our favor is that the more we have female leaders in business, leading males, the more we have an opportunity for males to start having a day-to-day environment where they experience female leadership. They reassess themselves against it. So like an example, majority of my career, I've been led by females, and it's been such a blessing for me because it gives me an opportunity to also learn from my previous leaders and my current leader, where they're thinking about the human being in the conversation. They're thinking about how do we lead them more effectively? How do we give them the right resources? And so I think systemically, the better representation we have across the business, and yes, this talks to gender representation, but I think broader representation as well. The more the narrative kind of shifts in the organization, the more the perspectives shift, just from a systems pressure perspective. And I think that's such an amazing leverage point, if I can use that word, where it's not just only on the leader themselves to start shifting, but the environment around them is also starting to shift, and that creates almost that pressure for you to also shift. And I think that's an amazing opportunity, because for those who work kind of with behavioral science at the back end, you know that your environment is one of the major drivers of behavior. And you can, as yourself, want to change your behavior, but if your environment drives you to act a certain way, you will keep acting that way. And you can talk about this kind of in the addiction space, where, the best way to support someone who's addicted is to take them out of that environment and put them into a different environment. And I think by the kind of the corporate environment shifting and the environment changing the expectations, that actually creates a very conducive place for men to also step into their own and be like, yes, I can share my emotions. I can be emotionally vulnerable. I have the permission from the environment to do that as well. So I think there's a massive opportunity for us where we are now, where and I think a major driver of this is kind of better representation. And so as a leader, and I saw it was somewhere in the comments where someone spoke about kind of how do I balance the need between someone else taking my position or taking an opportunity from me. And I think we've already addressed it from an abundance mindset perspective, but I think it's not a net zero game. I think it's everyone ends up better by us being better leaders. And so I think the environment's going to push a lot of that. And obviously you have to act on your own, but I'm very optimistic about it because I can see how those environments are shifting and changing the expectations.
I mean, if I may also just add, I mean, with regards to, I mean, insecurities in leadership, I mean, we've seen over the years, I mean, the downside of having that type of mindset that you just mentioned now. I mean, it always leads into roads or inroads that I don't think an organization would like to find itself in, because mostly what happens is you find that there's just poor decision making, right? Because then that insecurity causes you to be a bit more indecisive, and you end up second guessing either the decision that you need to make, because you're just afraid of making mistakes because of the insecurities. Then typically what will then happen, whether top or down, is then there's an avoidance of feedback, because you're avoiding the criticism based on whether the mistake that you've made or the decision that you would have taken, right? So then that fear of judgment, it leads you then to also not give feedback to others. That just hinders growth in its entirety. And I think what happens is the third aspect or element is that there's a constant need for validation. So you've got this constant desire to be liked or to be like the smartest person in the room. So then if you find yourself as a male in a room full of females, then that validation really just like steps up. And it also then incorporates a little bit of a blame culture, because you want to shift blame to other people instead of taking the responsibility, and because you're quite clear, you're decisive as a human being, you're decisive as a leader, but all that insecurity breeds are all of those critical steps that I just mentioned now, and it really just hinders growth and it hinders progress where we need to be. So fear of change is also a part of insecurity, but it's we are human beings, so inclined sort of like to have fear, but all of those steps are really critical in hindering business growth and in hindering opportunities that we need to create either for ourselves or for other people that we in turn then lead.
Just add one point to that. And I think in the comments, there's also a view about ambitious women. I'm going to say ambitious people in your team. I think you must open your arms and embrace them so widely, because ambitious individuals and smart individuals must be welcome. Because they will teach you and educate you, even if you are the most seasoned leader, on things you may not have realized. They could open up opportunities that you never thought of. So the advice that I have for people that are struggling with that concept is to say, unleash the ability of those individuals, as opposed to trying to curtail their ability to suit your style. Adapt your style to open them and allow them an opportunity to actually unleash their ability. Because what you start to have is you start to actually then create safety nets around understanding that we can take a chance, we can try a concept, we can drive a view that is contrary to our own, because it doesn't mean it's contrary, it's wrong. And just because we told the line, or we did this particular process for 5,000 years, well, maybe it's time we change it. And we must be bold enough to say there's an incredible opportunity to unleash the skills and the ability of human beings that you find in your team. Because I mean, how else are you going to change the paradigm, and how else are you going to change this culture and the environment that we're in if you're not going to do that?
These are all very, very good points made, and it kind of, they all turn the mirror on us to kind of look at us as human beings and examine our own emotional states and level of tolerance towards insecurity and vulnerability, sort of in a nutshell, in order to allow for a healthier organizational culture. If I could summarize very simply, I do have a contentious question to ask. You know, organizations are what they are. They attract their fair share of well-intentioned people as well as not so well-intentioned people. And you're all making a case for this very collaborative style of leadership where we step over our fears and our fear of being made redundant, although at the end of our careers we are superfluous and we will have to hand over the baton at some point. But when it comes to the nitty-gritty, you advocate for a new style of leadership. How does that work with colleagues or players or stakeholders who are not so well intentioned? And you know, because that is reality. We all know, we all have worked with people where we are a bit circumspect and where we are a little bit cautious, either when we manage upwards or our peers or someone reporting to us. I know it's quite a detailed and possibly difficult question, but I mean, what is your advice here?
May I?
Please.
Hi. So, culture is a big word. I'm just going to briefly give my definition of it, which I think is practical. If I was presenting in person to the audience and I didn't wear a belt on my trousers, I think it would be okay. People might notice, but they wouldn't make a big deal out of it. If I, on the other hand, did not wear any trousers, I think many people might leave the room, or they just may think that is unacceptable. You know, what is this Irish guy presenting in his boxer shorts for? It's not cool. So culture to me is acceptable behavior. And I think as leaders, whether you are male or female, you drive what is acceptable behavior in your workplace. And I, for one, have a very simple mechanism with which to use the foundation of performance management. It's the Jack Welchian quadrants of performance on the x-axis and attitude or cultural fit on the y-axis. And if somebody's a rock star performer and they have a great attitude and totally fit your culture, then they're great. If they have neither, then they need to go. If they have the performance without the attitude and cultural fit, they're the watch out, because as soon as their performance goes, they're in the get rid of them zone. But we spend most of our energies helping people who've got the right attitude and the right cultural fit improve their performance so they can move into the Northeast Stars. And that, for me, I'm proud of the fact that I'm 62 years old. I've worked in corporates for 4 decades, and I've never fired somebody because of their lack of competence, because they haven't hit a number or they haven't done anything. But by God, I've fired a lot of people if they're dishonest or they don't care or they don't fit in the team environment or anything like that. And that's what drives me. And I see no instance, panel, of me changing that outlook on life. That just works for me, and it's that's it.
That's it's a wonderful paradigm. Very male, by the way. It's quite rectangular, but it works. It works, and very good. JP.
Yeah, I think from my side, I think Nikki touched on ethics, and I think we also saw it somewhere up in the chat about ethical leadership, especially in South Africa. And I think if I had to distill it within my own context, I think for us, it's around unethical things happen if the results become the final focus. If it's the target that we need to hit by any means possible, that's when weird things start happening. And people start cutting corners where they're not supposed to cut corners. But if the focus is the people, and how do we do work that is done well to develop people to do the work well in future? I'm going to come back to this concept of the people are not the means to the end, because it's very important in our space in terms of ethics. Is if the people are a means to an end, then I will cut corners, I will push them, I will drive them to get to that result. The same with my processes. If the target is the end, then I will push and cut in where I need to get there. But if the people are the end, the only way I build good people is by doing things correctly. Because you don't want to reinforce the negative behavior. You don't want to teach bad things to those people to kind of get you a result. And so for me, where I see things go wrong normally is the targets are the targets. We have to get there by whatever means is possible. There's severe negative consequences if we don't get there. And so the environment pressures me and I start pushing and I start cutting. Where if the targets are still there, yes, they're important. That is what we need to hit for shareholder value. But the way we get there is through our people and developing them and growing them. We actually surpass what those expectations are because we allow people to live their full potential. And so, as a leader and as a male, we need to be able to be comfortable with creating the culture, which Nikki touched on, where we don't accept these things. We don't accept these behaviors. And as men leading, if you have other men reporting into us or around us, they're more likely to listen to us as other men within the workplace. And the more we keep each other accountable, the better, we'll get in terms of managing these things. And then I know, Ty, you were talking about kind of leading up. I think if you come to the conversation in a human way with your direct line manager and you say, listen, I don't agree with this. I feel there's a different way for us to do this. I think it's a much easier conversation to have than to try and approach it as a conflict point or, I'm trying to push a certain thing. But if I come to a conversation with a lot of humility and emotional intelligence and versatility to the conversation, and I'm like, I'm not happy with this. We need to think about this differently. This is my suggested output or different outcome or way. I think we can very effectively start pushing up in a way that's human instead of pushing up in a way that's I'm questioning you and I don't believe in your leadership ability.
JP, I think both you and Nikki make very, very strong points. Nikki, I love that concept of kind of handling the situation with the individual, because if you've been in the business or if you've been in leadership for a number of years, inevitably you're going to have a situation like this that someone just does not, in terms of from an ethical perspective or from a governance perspective, fit the profile of what you're creating. And it takes courage to have a tough one. It takes courage to have a tough one. It's easier to sit with your superstar and heap praise on them because everything validates why they're the superstar. It takes so much mental capacity for you to deal with a tough performer because you then need to implement solutions to improve performance. And be it a daily conversation or development discussion, But again, it takes a lot of time, energy, and effort from the leader to improve performance. And if you do all of those steps and you still cannot get the individual morally or mentally or whatever to move up, then we must make peace with the fact that maybe this is not the place for the individual. And that is part of the performance management and leadership accountability. But what happens and what tends to happen, and I need to make this statement, and it may be controversial, is that because we don't want to deal that tough conversation, I leave it for JP, who takes over the team and still has to deal with the same issue that may have been there before. So I think the reality of leadership is also when you move on to the next space, be genuine enough to have a conversation with the leader who's either succeeding you or taking over from you, whatever the case may be, to say, I really tried to have this, that, and the other, but I did not succeed as a starting point. Because now all of a sudden you're starting to change the dynamics of the way in which we manage. Because we've got a lot of talented individuals in teams that almost fall behind the noise makers who aren't necessarily the best performers, but they survived longer because we change leadership and it gives reprieve to poor performers.
Yep, that's you make very, very valid points there. We have about half an hour left. There's been quite a few questions in the sidebar. I'm not quite sure how to tackle them. I don't know whether any of you have been sort of keeping one eye on them and may want to speak to them, but there is a theme that comes up here around defining masculine leadership. And one comment in particular, against the backdrop maybe of what you are all advocating in the normative sense of what leadership should be, that there's a phenomenon of men taking a backseat, not being quite sure how they should step up. There's the issue here of ratios of that women are hired in higher numbers to get to a prescribed ratio of women in business, and Paul, you spoke about that. So there's a sort of a shadow side of, or the unspoken side of what you guys have been discussing, is men who have the potential but don't step up because they are reading the signs as, well, maybe my leadership, or I'm not that welcome, or I don't really have a role or a voice. And what is your advice around that phenomenon? Is it a phenomenon? Have you observed it? And if so, what would you say to that?
I mean, interestingly, I think there was an article that I saw, I think after we had a discussion on Friday. It's called The Quiet Crisis of Young Men. So I think for me, that's where maybe we should start looking at this thing fundamentally with regards to, I mean, if the crisis would start there, then it enables us enough time to have conversations with the young men who are then not even in leadership positions yet to manifest into those roles. But so the article is around a group of discussions that was had with young men, and they felt like the future holds no promise for them. So in the article, it speaks about young girls outperforming them in school, excluding them in social spaces, and increasingly dominating professional fields. So for them, the traditional, let's call it male expectations, which is leading, providing, initiating, sort of feel outdated and even unwelcome at times. And so all of that, leaving them with no new model in place to operate them. So these young men feel that this is a transactional world, but has left them with no model in place, and they're collapsing. And there's no clear alternatives that society has built for them. And then there's a quote that suggests that unlike previous generations, that the boys are not carrying the attitudes of their fathers and their grandfathers. They're not demanding a return for outdated generals. But what they do need, what all people need actually, is a sense of direction, right? So I think in this particular construct, referring to how men are feeling, how boys are feeling, there's a level of direction that is required and is needed, because I mean, I think earlier on there was a discussion point around male suicide dramatically increasing, because then it means that men particularly young men that are not in leadership roles yet, are withdrawing from either education, from work, from social environments at a highly increasing rate. And it's not because of a lack of trying and attempt. I think it's because there's a sense where they feel shut out. And from modern environments, and then they tend to, let me call it, mask their pain in defiance. But beneath all of that just lies a little sense of alienation without direction. So I think we need to start finding ways to address the shift in social landscape, particularly for young men that want to be in leadership roles. And for those that already are, how do we elevate the thinking mechanisms and patterns to ensure that they can have those deep, meaningful, open discussions that touch base on every aspect that drives young men without feeling alienation at all?
I
Please go
think
ahead.
I'll
add to that
a small piece of this, and it's by far not the whole answer, but I think it's something that kind of sprung to mind to me is our young men really need good role models. They need men who can show them how to act in a way that helps them fit into society. I think men in general are struggling with this new demand in terms of expectations. And with that, the younger guys are looking up to us to say, okay, but how are they handling it? Oh, they're struggling. So how am I supposed to know what I'm supposed to do? And I think that's where that kind of anxiety comes from. And we all know when you're that age, you haven't really developed effective coping mechanisms. And so your coping mechanism is to, I don't know, follow right-wing guys on social media, or, you try and act masculine, but you actually become toxic. And so I think, as a group of men, we really have to step up and become role models in our communities. And I think, given where we are now, we've become so westernized that we don't have communities anymore. Like, our communities are broken. People live in their own houses. They don't see a group of men showing you how to act and being role models around them. And I'm completely generalizing here. So please, I know there's nuances and differences in different communities, but I think as a group of men, we have to really step up and be like, how do we role model and show our young men what a good male or masculinity looks like, rather than leaving them to their own devices where they kind of use other men who are stepping into that space to show them how to act, which is not the right way to act. So that's one piece that I was thinking of.
So if I just may add to JP's comment, while most of my thought process is coming from the commercial world, quarter of a century with Oracle, a very capitalistic company, I've also influenced by my thinking, having been CEO for Crystal House, a school for the poorest of the poor, and in my current role as chairman of the Redham Foundation, getting underprivileged kids private education. And JP's point is maybe not something that was the main focus of what our discussion has heretofore been today, but the future of South Africa needs positive male role models, or we are at risk, at serious risk. The girls are so far ahead in the communities that I'm referring to in terms of not just their IQ and capabilities, but as importantly, if not more importantly, with their attitudes, their EQ, and their ability to lead in the future. We have a major crisis in South Africa, which we need to sort out. Sorry, I'm not posing solutions. I'll go back to JP for that. I'm just articulating the problem even further.
Yeah. I think the point, though, is also that a corporate leader is, even in the communities, is seen as boring. It's a boring job to have a 9 to 5 or a 8 to 4. And maybe it's an opportunity for the leaders that are on the line, and us, to actually step up and demonstrate that it's cool. Because not only are you impacting other human beings, but you're actually driving and focusing on developing other leaders in this leadership construct. And I think they just see a narrow stance in terms of how they view some of us in what I'd like to call boring corporate jobs, but they're not. I mean, there's a massive opportunity for us to really demonstrate that this could be where you would make a real difference. And maybe that's lacking, and we need to work harder at demonstrating that capability.
Spot on.
Yeah.
JP, you're going to offer the solution, please.
So,
But I mean,
how do we solve world hunger?
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. And no, I think there's a couple of things for me here. One is we need to be that in corporate. I know we're talking about youth, but I think the first point of real culture experience is them going into the workplace. I think we need to be very clear on how we model vulnerable leadership, how we enable them to see what that looks like, creating spaces where people feel safe. And, I don't want to necessarily go too much into the community involvement and community volunteering and kind of being in that space. I know there's a lot of work in that space as well. And as males stepping up and moving into that space, because traditionally a lot of volunteers in the kind of non-profit space are females, and so a lot of those guys are being exposed to females in that space, and so there's no lack of leadership or males in that space, and the guys who are there are doing amazing work. But I think where for me we can have a massive impact is, let's say we run a learnership or an internship, or that first point of contact for young people coming into the workplace is really creating an environment where they're like, wow, is this what a company is like to work for? This is amazing. Like this is like, I thought all of the stuff on social media is what a corporate is like, but now I'm coming into this company and it's completely not what I expected. And then they start chatting to their friends and they tell their friends, but that's not what corporate is supposed to be like. Like this company I'm working for is amazing. Like that's not what you should. And they talk among each other and the news spreads and the message spreads. And I think there's something that sticks with me where this is a story about Nestle, how they wanted to break into the Asian market. But coffee wasn't big in Asia. They wanted to sell coffee. There was tea. And for many years, they struggled to move into the Asian market, but they just couldn't break the market. And one of the guys in their team, I don't know who it was, marketing or commercial, whatever, said, we actually have to help people grow up with coffee because they're not growing up with coffee. They're growing up with tea. And so what they started doing is they started having kids shows, they started having coffee flavored sweets, and they started embedding that taste for coffee, that want for coffee, the what we have on a daily. And by the time those people became adults, they bought coffee. And it was such a long-term view of how to kind of shift behavior that I think like we should be thinking about how do we, as business, very broad term, how do we start shifting those minds so young, like they did with that kind of model? And I know it's very specific, but like, how do we shift those expectations, shift those models, and move those things in a way that actually makes sense? That's my solution.
No, I think that is absolutely spot on. It has to start at a very early age, and I think for those children or boys who have parents and can sit down at a dinner table, those conversations, should be had at home. And on the negative side, and you spoke about it, JP, is like our communities are very fragmented. Everyone's disappeared off into the digital space. And I, for one, I know instantly when my son, when he voices opinions that are not his own, but something he's picked up from, what's his name, Andrew Tate, the hair on my back starts to bristle, and I have to gently maneuver him out of that. But all his peers are listening to this nonsense. And so, how do we model at home and in the community and when we play sports, how do we model healthy leadership? And I think that is sort of the big question that I have, also the big challenge for us all. We have a couple of minutes. There's been a huge amount of commentary on the right-hand side. A lot acknowledging and praising your inputs, and I have to second that. I think I've learned more in the 1 hour than I would have learned reading the 57,000 books on leadership that I could buy on Amazon. It's been very insightful, and actually the conversation and the themes have gone to a place that I hadn't expected. And so thank you very much for that. But we still have a couple of minutes, and maybe if the speakers could pick up one or two questions on the right-hand side that you feel you might not have covered and would like to comment on, so that everyone feels they got their fair share of questions and answers.
While they're just doing that, Ty, I'm just going to make a very quick comment, please, on what Neelan and JP just mentioned, because to me, I agree with you. I didn't expect the conversation to go in this direction, but I think I don't know whether we're stumbling or we're with purpose identifying a solution. But when we talk about men in leadership and some of our areas for improvement and that empathy and things like that, you know, men in corporate reaching out and helping those in communities to develop more role models. And to Neelan's point, corporate is sexy, corporate is cool, we too. I think there's a lot in that. That's all I'm saying. I think we did stumble on some good solutions, thank you, gentlemen, to an age-old problem. So that was very reassuring and happy for me.
Yeah, I second that. Have you guys picked up on any questions you'd like to answer?
We're men. We can't multitask like this. That should be a women in leadership goal. You know, we can't do this stuff.
That's why I delegated it to you, because I can't have my left eye and my right eye on two different sections of the screen. JP, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to. I see the comment there about bringing a boy child to work. I think, you know, in our attempt to make workplaces quite controllable and predictable, we've moved away from the things that actually brings community into the workplace. And when I'm going to touch on this community thing again, like we used to have, like, bring your child to work day, and I don't know if companies still do this, you know, bring your child to work day. It's safe to bring your children to work if you need to on a day. And because I think it's such an amazing opportunity for children to have a little glimpse into what you actually do on a day-to-day basis. What's corporate like? Oh, it's normal. It's just people sitting in a room working, you know, and it actually almost like, because I've seen a lot of social media content around, you know, the matrix, and corporate is the matrix, and, you know, you should be disconnecting from the matrix and whatever, you know, that kind of jargon that they spew on social media. And I think by normalizing the workplace environment, making it like, oh, this is just another building that someone goes to and works in with other people to try and achieve a mission. Having kids exposed to that, I know when I was growing up, we did a whole lot of field trips to businesses where they would take us through their day-to-day and show us, you know, what they do. And I think those stuff is so valuable, where instead of going to Gold Reef City, you go to, you know, a company and you go and experience it, and you're going to get exposure there, and companies being open to these things. I know, and I'm talking in generalizations, I know there are certain businesses who still do this, but I think those are such valuable tools to get young people to understand what the workplace looks like, how it's just people sitting in a room working together, and that it's not this kind of conceptual villain in the world, and, you know, what it's being portrayed on social media.
No, absolutely. And, you know, as Novia One, we train previously unemployed people. I'd like to thank everyone, including yourselves, you know, for making that possible for people to have that, graduates to have that experience. What is it like to go to corporate and learn something and grow and progress? And that's very, very, very important. Yeah. Anyone else would like to comment on the questions?
I think we have covered most of the points in terms of just the discussion. I think we tried our best to multitask, contrary to Nikki's point, but and I think we have covered quite a few. It's interesting because a small change can become a movement, and a movement can change paradigms. So So I think maybe the parting shot, because I think we're almost out of time, is that I want to revisit what Nikki shot down a little bit earlier. We all win when we all win is a crazy concept that will work. It will work because what it starts to teach people is that if you give a little, if you have more than enough, give a little so that we can have more. And this concept of I versus we and me versus us is really what needs to resonate a lot more, and not just in corporate, in the home, in the soccer fields, or in the team sports that the guys play or the individuals play, because we appreciate that not everyone will get to being a professional sports person. But man, when you watch any professional team, just think about all of the individuals that didn't get there and who had the aspirations to be there. And it doesn't always or necessarily mean they weren't good enough. Some of them may not just have had the opportunity or the right person opening a door for them. And if you think about the 106 on the call, um, we could be those people that opens the door for someone else and changes their life fundamentally. And I think we must never underestimate that.
Absolutely. So it's a call.
Awesome.
It's a call for being a bit generous. Yeah, generosity and awareness of who could benefit. Yeah. Paul.
Look, I think for me, my parting shot is I saw a statement that says part of the problem is leadership has been defined by a limited number of titles. And I think leadership should never, ever be about a title. For me, leadership is pure leadership. The title associated with it is what's going to make your mindset really want to drive something different, because it's a title. So leave the title out of it, and begin to want to conceptualize what it is like to be a leader. And I think James Grissom in back in 1873 said that, what do I know? I don't know if any of us are going to be okay. Am I going to be okay? I don't know. But what I want to tell everyone is that we are not going to be alone. We are not going to be abandoned. We're not going to be offered a prayer and a pat on the shoulder and an exit, right? We're going to hang around together as a collective, say what you need to say, and be here when the sun rises, and go out knowing a thing about what the day might present. That, for me, I think, encapsulates what leaders should be doing, because you don't know what you don't know until you know what you need to know.
Yeah. That's. I think that's very inspirational. Right. I feel we should carry on talking forevermore, because there are themes that are standing out and they need to be developed. And I'm going to go back to the team and find out whether maybe we can create a follow-on session, and hone in on some of the things that were said. There's a lot of wisdom, a lot of gold that was spoken in the last 1.5 hours, and I'd really like to thank you for your time and for sharing so generously. And the challenge, and I think your invitation and challenge is be generous and be vulnerable, and step outside of your fear and create safe containers to grow teams and grow everyone. And that's a very reductionist summary. There was a lot more. There were many more layers, and I don't know what's going to happen to the transcript or the recording. Verity, maybe you just. I see some people wanted to, get a copy of that. But I think this was really insightful, and thank you very much. And if we manage to do a follow-on, and I'm particularly interested in Neelan's PhD. I mean, there must be a huge amount of work and thinking going on there. And maybe we'll just do one session where you can talk about your thesis. That might be something for the future.
Curious to know, it's really the concept of into leadership and dealing with the dynamics of AI.
Wow. Okay.
So that's where it is, and it's an interesting one, but that's a story for another day.
Great. All right. Once again, thank you all very much. Hugely appreciated. Wonderful.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank
We'll talk
you.
soon.
Everyone.
Okay. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye bye.